Most people who study Neville Goddard, they quote 3 or 4 of his most famous lectures: the Pearl of Great Price, the Law and the Promise, maybe Awakening of Faith. It's the same handful of ideas that are recycled across thousands of videos. But there's 294 documented lectures that are archived at realneville.com. That's not 2, not 3, not 10, 294 separate teachings that span decades of his work. And inside that full archive is a pattern that almost nobody addresses, because most people, they never read past the popular titles. The pattern is this: Neville taught the same core mechanism in every lecture, but the examples he used, the lived testimony that he returned to again and again, those reveal something specific about how this works that the popularized versions of his teachings have completely stripped out. What gets repeated endlessly across modern content is assumption creates reality. What gets left out is what Neville actually meant by assumption, and how radically different that is from what most people are doing when they think they are assuming. There are people who have been applying Neville's work for years, and they still find themselves in the same situation they were in when they started. And it's not because they misunderstood the teaching as such, because they understood the sanitized version, the polished philosophy, the version that sounds simple enough to fit on some motivational poster. Assume the wish fulfilled. And it's easy to say, nearly impossible to do the way that Neville was describing it, because what he was describing, it wasn't a mental exercise. It was a complete transformation of an internal state that most people never reach. It's because they're working with a translated version of the teaching that had the most difficult part edited out. And that's worth sitting with. Across the full archive of lectures, Neville returns to a specific phrase more times than he does any other. Feeling is the secret. Not thinking, not visualizing, not affirming, feeling. But what modern content has done is take that word and assume that it means emotion, like generate a feeling of happiness, like feel good about the thing that you want. And that's not what Neville meant. It's not even close. The feeling that he is describing is the internal registration of identity, not happiness, not excitement. The felt sense of being the person for whom the desired outcome is already an established fact. And that distinction changes everything, because most people are trying to generate an emotion that matches the outcome that they want. They visualize the thing. They try to feel happy about it. And the subconscious registers that happiness as a wanting, as an attempting, as the thing not being here yet. The emotional charge becomes evidence of absence. And the more effort that goes into feeling positive about the desired outcome, then the more the subconscious encodes the gap between the current reality and the desired reality. What Neville described in lecture after lecture is a state that's so complete that the person is no longer trying to feel anything. They are simply occupying the identity for whom the thing is done. No emotional performance, no mental effort, just the quiet internal knowing that what was once desired is now resolved. And that knowing has a specific quality. The body is not broadcasting want, it's broadcasting certainty. And that broadcast is what reorganizes the external reality. In one lecture after another, Neville tells stories of people that came to him that were desperate for a specific outcome, a promotion, a relationship, financial relief. Every one of them had been affirming, visualizing, doing the techniques, and every one of them was still in exactly the same situation because they were performing the techniques from a state of lack. The visualization was an attempt to create the thing. The affirmation was an attempt to convince themselves. The attempt itself was the signal. And the signal the subconscious received was that this thing is not there. Neville would tell them to stop trying, not to stop wanting, to stop trying. The effort to make it happen is the evidence that it has not happened. Assumption in Neville's teaching is not trying to believe. It's resting in the state of already being. And that the rest is not passive, it's not waiting, it's the deepest kind of certainty. The kind that doesn't need evidence because the internal registration is so complete that external confirmation, it becomes irrelevant. There are people that hear that and immediately translate it into yet another technique. Assume harder, visualize more vividly, affirm with more conviction. The collection of techniques, they grow. The rituals, they multiply. But the transmission has not changed because assumption is not a technique. It's a state. And the state can't be performed. It can only be inhabited. Anyway, we'll come back to that in a few moments. Across the archive, Neville describes a specific sequence that almost no modern content addresses. The wish comes first. Someone identifies what they want. Then comes a period that most people call manifestation work, visualization, affirmations, mental rehearsal. That period is where most people stay. What Neville described as the critical moment is where the person stops wanting and starts assuming. Not because they convince themselves, but because something in their internal estate reorganized. The want just dissolved. What remained was the quiet certainty that the thing was already done. That reorganization is not intellectual. It's not a decision that someone makes with their conscious mind. It's a shift at a level beneath conscious thought. The subconscious accepts the new identity as a fact. And from that acceptance, Every action that follows is no longer an attempt to create the outcome. It's an expression of the outcome that's already occurred internally. The gap between wanting and assuming is the gap that most people never cross, because it requires letting go of the want entirely. Most people can't let go of the want because the want is the only thing that feels like they're doing something. Without the want, they feel like they've given up. But what Neville taught lecture after lecture is the want itself is the obstacle, not the thing being wanted, the wanting. The state of wanting keeps the thing at a distance, because wanting by definition means that the thing is not here. What modern content has done is try to make Neville's teachings easier, more accessible, and the result is a version of the teaching that sounds like positive thinking with better marketing. Believe it's yours. Assume the best. Feel grateful in advance. All of that language, it sounds right, but it misses the central point. Assumption in Neville's teaching is not about generating a feeling or holding a thought. It's about becoming someone else entirely. The person for whom the desired outcome is so established internally that the external world has no choice but to reflect it. That becoming is not a metaphor. It's a literal transformation of identity. The way someone speaks changes. The way they move through the world changes. The decisions that they make changes. Not because they're trying to act as if, because they are no longer the person who wants the thing. Identity is not performed. It is inhabited. And it is inhabited so completely that the old identity dissolves. In one of the lesser known lectures, Neville tells a story about a woman who wanted to marry a specific man. And she'd been visualizing for months, affirming, praying, and nothing changed. Neville told her to stop all of it. Stop the visualizing the wedding. Stop affirming that he would propose. Stop praying for it to happen. Instead, he told her to live from the end. Not imagine the end. Live from the end. Sleep every night as the woman who is already married to him. Not pretending, just actually occupying that identity so completely that the current reality becomes irrelevant. And she did. And within weeks, the man proposed. But what Neville emphasized in telling the story was not the proposal. It was what happened in the woman internally during those weeks. She stopped wanting him, not because she no longer cared, but because the want had been replaced by certainty. She was already his wife. The proposal was not the goal. It was the inevitable external reflection of what had already occurred internally. The external world reorganized around the identity that she had assumed. That is the mechanism. The identity is assumed first, completely, with no reference to current external conditions. And the subconscious, it begins operating from that identity. Every thought, every action, every decision is now being made by the person who already has the thing. And the external world reflects that internal state, because the external world is always reflecting the internal state. That's not belief, that's mechanism. Most people are waiting for external evidence before they allow themselves to assume the new identity. They want proof that it's working, some sign that reality is moving in the right direction. But waiting for the proof is the signal that the assumption has not occurred. Assumption does not wait for evidence. It generates evidence. The internal state is so fully established that the external reality has no option but to conform, not because of magic, but because the person occupying that state is making different decisions, seeing different opportunities, and responding to the world differently. And the world responds back. What Neville taught across hundreds of lectures is that the gap between the wanting something and having it, it's not time, it is state. The person who wants is in one state. The person who has is in another. Most people are trying to get from one state to the other by manipulating external conditions. Get the job first, then feel successful. Find the relationship first, then feel loved. Neville taught the reverse. Someone who inhabits the state of already feeling successful finds the job appearing. Somebody who inhabits the state of already feeling loved finds the relationship materializing. Someone who inhabits the state of already feeling secure finds the money following, not because the feeling creates the outcome directly, but because the feeling is the signal of identity. And identity determines what the external world is allowed to reflect. Someone who has worked with this long enough, they start to notice that the techniques are not the work. The work is the internal reorganization that happens when assumption becomes so complete that the current reality stops being relevant. That point where someone is no longer checking for evidence, no longer looking for signs, no longer wondering if it's working, because the question of whether it is working only arises for someone who is still wanting. Someone who has assumed does not ask if it's working. They know it's done. There is a lecture that's buried in the archive where Neville describes the moment that he realized his own teaching. He'd been wanting something for years, praying for it, visualizing it. Nothing changed. Then one day he stopped. He just simply assumed that it was already done. No effort, no technique, just the internal shift from wanting to knowing. And within days, the external conditions reorganized. Not because his wanting finally worked, because his wanting had been replaced by assumption. And that story is one of the least popular lectures. It doesn't get quoted. It doesn't fit the modern narrative that manifestation is about techniques and visualization and feeling good. But it's the most honest description in the entire archive of what actually happens when assumption occurs. The trying stops, the wanting stops, and what remains is the quiet and certainty that the thing is done. And from that certainty, everything else follows. And what most manifestation content will not say is that assuming the wish fulfilled is one of the hardest things that a person can do. And it's not because it's complicated, because it requires letting go of the want entirely. And most people are not willing to do that. They want the outcome, they want the certainty, but they are not willing to release the wanting, because releasing the wanting feels like giving up. It's the exact opposite. It's arriving at the place where the outcome is so certain internally that the external evidence becomes irrelevant. That arrival is not a technique. It's not something that someone does. It's something that someone becomes. And becoming is not gradual. It's a collapse. At one moment, the person is wanting, and the next moment, they are not. What collapsed was the identity of the person who wants. And what remains is the identity of the person who has. That collapse is what Neville was teaching. Not how to want better, how to stop wanting entirely, but becoming the person for whom the thing is already done. And that's across 294 lectures repeated by Neville. The same teaching in different words. Assume the wish fulfilled. Live from the end. The feeling is the secret. All of those phrases point to the same thing. Stop wanting and start being. And the gap between those two states is where most people spend their entire lives, wanting without assuming, trying without becoming. The techniques give them something to do, but the doing itself is the problem, because the person who has does not do. They simply are. And from that being, everything that they wanted appears, not because they made it happen, but because it could not have been any other way. And this is something that I want to name directly because it matters. Everything that I've been teaching across this channel, the state work, the visualization, the feeling of already having, it's always been pointing here, not to generating a positive emotion, not to creating a vivid image and just hoping it lands. It's always been about the assumption, the internal registration that the thing is already done. That this is the same thread that has been running through everything that I've talked about. Whenever I've talked about visualizing or feeling, the visualizing is never meant to be wishful thinking. It's always meant to be the practice of occupying the identity for whom the thing is already real. That's the teaching, the actual teaching. And it's available in full. If you want to read his lectures, most people never read them all. Let's stop the techniques and be the person for whom it has already happened.